Welcome everyone, this is Dr. Thor. This is part 3 of building a very simplistic classic radionic unit. And remember, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm the foremost radionic expert in the world. Don't believe other people, don't follow their nonsense. They are really ignorant, buffoonish people. So we're going to teach you how to make a very simple unit. This is a classic unit, and this is what we have in front of us right here. Which was made for me as a prototype, not quite up to my standards, but an interesting little unit that gives you an idea. Now, one of the things we left off with before was the actual dials. Now, printing something out, putting it on here is difficult. You're better off getting a dial that has numbers on it. Now, we talked about this a wee bit in the last one, but here's a 0 to 10 dial. Now, it depends on what you can get. Let me get it. I don't know if I can get a clear picture of this, but this is a 0 to 10 dial. You can get dials that are 0 to 100, and they're not that much more. It depends if you want to go through the trouble of actually putting registration marks here, which is difficult and problematic in general. But you can get a dial like this. These are inexpensive. They probably cost two or three US dollars. And they're usually available around the world. You can find some dial that has numbers on it. Now, what's important about that is that it means you don't have to print this. The other thing is all you really have to do is put a registration mark. I mean, you put a little mark here, and that's how you know whether it's on 1, 2, or 3. So it's very easy to do that. That's what I recommend you do. And of course, I can show you on one of our advanced mini models. Here is another dial. And you can see it has a registration mark at the top, and it starts at 0, and then you open this up and you dial it. But you need a registration mark. Very important. And you're also going to have to find some way to number your dials. Now, this is a very old unit, and I had stickers on here to number them, but you've got to know which dial to go after each other. And this is kind of a unique one. 3 goes to 4, and then it goes up, then it goes here, and then it goes down. So it's kind of this zigzag pattern. A lot of people go left to right, but if you're tuning something, you need to know that. So keep that in mind when you're making it, and make sure you number your dials in some fashion or you're aware of how you're doing it. So not only do you need the numbers on the dial and a registration mark, you need to know this is dial 1, and all units are dialed in sequence. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to use a radionic unit. That's very different. And of course, we have courses on that. That's a whole nother game. We're just showing you construction here. So that covers that. And of course, you need 2 plates. You need an input plate and an output plate. There's no such thing as a trend plate. That's another stupid thing probably started by a bozo who knows nothing. Oh, computer-wise, yeah. I got some Yakamoto's disease, and I can't fix it. As some idiots will tell you. The other thing that you want to generally do, and we're going to open this up here in a minute and show you the wiring. But you do want to have jacks as well. Your standard jacks are 3.5s. You want jacks to go in and you want jacks to go out. Okay, this way you can plug things into it, etc. if you're using the old style units. I don't use wiring anymore. And you got to remember that radionic units in general are not electric. Now, this is something people are very confused about. Basically, there's nothing in a radionics unit. No electricity goes through it, never has, never will. I've worked with every single radionic unit made from the 1920s, from Abrams to Hieronymus machines to all the newer junk machines. And even fancy machines like Copen, who are very attractive machines with multi-dials, but there's no electricity going to them. The only electricity goes to power a light, so you think it's on. Now let's take a look at the wiring here. Now again, there's nothing in a radionic machine. So let's look at what's in here in terms of all you have inside a modern radionic units are potentiometers. This is what the dials, when you turn them, turns. It's a potentiometer. This replaced the tunable capacitors that are frequently used. This is the new tech. Capacitors are the old tech. Some people like capacitors, some people like potentiometers, but people like Ruth Drown, Delaware, etc. did not use tunable capacitors. Only Hieronymus did, and whether that's better or not is very subjective. And tunable capacitors are very expensive now, and they're very large. You would have to have a box that was twice the depth of this one. 3-4 inches, because the depth of a tunable capacitor is generally very large. As you can see, it's very short on something like this. This is probably half an inch from here to there. This goes up through there. So everybody uses potentiometers. It's really not a problem to think that tunable capacitors are better is getting into kind of silliness when you ultimately get to it. So the whole idea is that we have to understand that. So you can see how this is actually wired. Now this is the, check here, this is the number one. These are linked in series. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let me go over again. 7, 8, 9. So what you're doing here is what most people do with 9 dials. And if you don't have a 9-dial unit, you're wasting your time. There just is not enough tunable capacity with 1 dials. This is all screw you. You want to buy a cheap unit, and of course you want to have a race car, but you want to buy a bike. Doesn't work. So the tuning goes like this, then it drops down and goes this, then it drops down and goes across. Very important that you have them, that you know the flow of the energy. Now, the energy has to go to dial 1 to 2, 3 to put in the rates properly. And you have to use base 10 rates. You can't use any rates you want because you got a book or some stooge told you that. It doesn't work like that. You have to use them. So would you put diesel fuel in your gasoline car? Well, you can, and it don't work. So we got to keep that in mind. So all of that is a reality that you should look at. So the other thing we have here, again, these are potentiometers. Now, potentiometers come in different values. You want to use the same value. Basically, 100K, I don't know what it says on this one in particular. 100K potentiometer is generally a good thing to start. And you've got to understand that these have to have the actual opening has to be 100, is it 180? Yeah, 180 degrees they have to open, or you will not be able to go from 0 all the way to 10. Now, this is a problem finding potentiometers that will spin that much for a dial from 0 to 10. So you have to be careful of that because a lot of them are only 80 degrees, which means you're only going to 0 to 5 or 6, and this is a problem. Okay? So we really have to understand that in the bigger picture, that you have to make sure that you're using the proper, I don't know if this says on here, this is not something, I pulled this out of a recent machine, that 22K, but generally use 100K or even 1 meg. Ruth Drown used to use 1 meg potentiometers in her units. But it doesn't matter, but use the same. No, it does matter. Use 100K or up and use the same value for every dial. Don't use 50K in one, 100K, 200K for the others, 1 meg for them. So use all the same potentiometer. So let me give you a little view of this, and maybe if you're trying to figure out wiring and everything else, by giving you a nice clear picture here that you can see it. So as I said, this is number 1. And of course, this is where all your in jacks are going to go for. So these that are wired, these 3 in jacks, which are over to here, these are your in jacks. And of course, all the in jacks goes into the first dial because the first dial then flows through the rest. Simple as that. Your out jacks, of course, go to your last dial, which is here, which then goes down to here. Very important to wire things like that for your in and out jacks. And it's always nice to have in and out jacks so you can add components on if you desire. And of course, that's the old way of doing things. I use wireless systems, but my technology is very advanced. Now, the only thing you're doing here, these are classically wired. I don't know if we can, here we go. Let's take off some of the glue. And this pretty much shows you right here. Let's get in there. So potentiometers have these three attachments here. And of course, it's the same thing. This one goes to here. Then the center one goes over to the first one of here. This one, again, is wired this way. So this is pretty classical wiring. So that you have the potentiometers wired like this. As long as you've got a good connection, it's fine. Now, these are generally soldered on here. I recommend people use lead-free solder. Lead is a toxin. It's not really good to use any metals like that in your unit because these are subtle energy machines. So if you put lead in there, certain residents of that lead, that toxin, which is very toxic to the human body, will be in your unit. So do keep that in mind. And of course, you have this plate. Your in plate is wired to your first dial. See how this is going down in here, and he's wired it into the first dial there. And this generally is just nothing more than a spiral. Now, this person has glued that spiral, and it should be a clockwise spiral. Must be clockwise. If you feed something in counterclockwise, you're using negative energy. That spiral, which is just pure copper wire, goes into the first particular potentiometer as you see it here. So this, I have a little bit, I wire things a little different, but this is very classical, typical Ruth Drown, typical base 10 units and how they're wired by most people. So we do have to understand that. There are a few other options in here, and we are going to go over those as well. That's your typical. Now, the last dial here. Now, this is your last dial or your 9th dial. Again, you've got that oops, let me get down there. This is your last dial or your 9th dial. And you'll see that we have, again, a copper wire here, just pure copper that goes down into a clockwise actual coil. Now, what this guy has done here, and I don't recommend doing this because the nature is that he's has his last dial goes into a clear quartz crystal, which then feeds as an amplifier. This would be amplifying the energy and then going back in there. Now, a lot of people like to use crystals, but the problem with crystals are nothing more than energy stores. It's like putting something on a data bank, okay? A memory. The problem is that in your computer, you can delete something. You delete the file, and you don't have problems with that again. The problem with a crystal here is that if you use a crystal for amplification, it means it's going to hold all the energy from everything that you do. You have to clear it out. Now, we do have clearing plates that we offer that you place your machine on. There's a lot of little things to do as well. But generally, if you want amplification like this, you're better off getting a crystal like this and just putting it on the out plate. And you can then vary the stones you use, etc. When you put this in your circuit and it's not cleared out, everything you do is going to be in there. And this will conflict with the energies that you are broadcasting. So that's very, very important. So that's your basic for part 3 here. We'll pick up again in part 4 and go over some more details. But that's your basic setup. It's very, very simple. There's no electricity going through here, and there never was, there never will be. None of Ruth Drowns, Abrams, or anything else. Nobody has electricity going through the tuning circuit. We'll talk about the other things that you need to have as well as we get into the further parts of it. But that's it. There's nothing more. You have your in plate. In plate goes to the first dial. That goes to the other ones, and they have to be wired in sequence. Your last dial then goes to your out plate. I see that down there? There we go. Your last one goes to your out plate. That's your rubbing plate, your out plate in general. That's what your energy is going out there, and that's also your rubbing plate or where you hold your pendulum over to tune the unit. As we just mentioned, putting a crystal in here is not a good idea, but if you want to do that, you've got to clear your machine out each time. And of course, it's always good to have in and out jacks. Now, these are in jacks, so you can put other things in, no matter what that is. This way it goes directly into your circuit. So since you've wired this like an electrical unit, having direct jacks is very important. And then, of course, you have your out... Oops, did I show that? You have your in jacks, which come from here. This is your first dial. I'm going to get that in the picture. There we go. These are, of course, your in jacks. So the energy is flowing like this here and that. And then we have the out jacks, which is from the last dial here, that are then flowing here to your out jacks. And these are very handy and something you definitely should put in your own unit if you're making it. And you can see how simplistic this is. Anybody who can... do a little bit of wiring, and again, you can use lead-free solder, a little bit of soldering, and of course, you don't really have to worry about how great the connection is because it's really not electricity going through there, so there's no danger to it. Some people like to put in here, this is an on and off switch. If you like that for psychological reasons, that's fine as well. I'm not sure why this person put an electrical, thing in here, but a lot of people put this in here, and then this wire would go up to a light. Or, I don't know, I guess there is a light in this one. This may light up, but you can see that it doesn't do anything. It just lights that up. But people like the psychological crutch of that. I would recommend you get away from that. Radionics is not electromagnetic in nature. But people will tell you lies and tell you that it's computer-wise. Me, a computer expert. So the whole idea is you hear a bunch of garbage like that from people that are certainly, and of course, here's your jacks on the side. Now, these are 3.5 jacks, which are your standard. You can also use RCAs if you like. I prefer RCAs. They look better, but this is your standard 3.5 jack that generally headphones for MP3 players and other things, when we used headphones, would use that jack. So it's very common. You can get 3.5 wires everywhere. So that's why it's nice to use 3.5. Now, as I said, I'll pick up in part 4 the rest of the details on this and go over several things to make this process clear. But hopefully you can freeze your screen, look at the wiring, and then you'll be able to figure it out better. But it's very, very simple if you know anything about electronics. Even if you don't, I mean, almost anybody could make something like this without a big problem if you want to make your own unit. And we'll talk about that in lesson 4.